The condemnation report was 6,000 pages long. I had read all of it. Page 1 said we would die. Pages 2 through 6,000 explained, in 17 different alien technical terms, exactly how. I had highlighted every term. I had built a glossary. I had printed the glossary, folded it into my breast pocket, and was now reading it again on a colony ship that smelled like 300 people and everything they were carrying inside their chests. My name is Mara Osaibansu. I am 34 years old. I am a structural engineer. I have rebuilt flood barriers from shipping containers, rerouted geothermal lines through active fault zones, and once kept a sinking coastal platform stable for 11 days with wire cable and a calculation I made on the back of a food wrapper. I have a list of credentials that looks impressive until you find out what the jobs actually were. The planet ahead of us was called HFY. The Galactic Survey Commission had surveyed it in 2287. Their conclusion, delivered on the very first page before they even introduced themselves, was that no living species should attempt to build anything on its surface. The core was venting. The tectonic plates were not so much shifting as arguing. The magnetic field wiped unshielded electronics every 11 hours with the reliability of a utility bill. Surface gravity fluctuated. 3 VRETH survey drones had been swallowed by a fissure on day 2 of the original survey mission. The GSC had recommended quarantine buoys and permanent archival status. Earth's colonial authority had bought the deed. I am told the price was approximately what you would pay for a decent lunch in the Geneva district. The colonial authority representative on our ship was a man I called the Blazer privately, because he wore a pressed blazer in zero gravity for reasons I could not determine after 31 days of observation. His name was something official. He had the face of a man who believed deeply in the power of documentation. He had briefed us in the second week of travel. The colony ship's main hall, 300 people seated in magnetic lock chairs, and the Blazer standing at the front with a presentation that began with the words, "Exciting opportunity." I had written in my log, day 14, "Let the record show." His explanation was simple. The affordable habitable worlds in our colonial range had already been claimed by better-funded species. The Class D planets were spoken for. The Class C planets required atmospheric processing that would take 60 years minimum. HFY was the only Class M atmosphere in reach. Breathable air, liquid water, surface temperature within survivable range, technically, if you define survivable with some generosity. Someone in the third row had asked why the GSC condemned it. The Blazer had said, "Tectonic instability," in the tone of someone describing minor traffic. I had not asked any more questions that day. I already knew the answers. I had the glossary in my pocket. The VRETH diplomatic vessel intercepted us at the quarantine buoy on day 31. It was a beautiful ship, long and silver, designed like something that had grown rather than been built. The VRETH were old species, older than recorded galactic contact with Earth by several thousand years, and they moved and communicated with the particular patience of beings who had watched a great deal of history and found most of it avoidable. Their diplomat came through on the comm channel. His translator rendered his name as a sequence of sounds I genuinely could not reproduce, so I called him Quarantine, because he had stationed himself at one. He was polite. He was thorough. He explained in 4 languages, 2 of which our translator software handled well and 2 of which it approximated, that the condemnation of HFY was not a suggestion. It was a classification. It was based on 11 months of survey data and the loss of 3 remote drones. The core venting cycle alone produced seismic events that registered as weapons grade on standard monitoring equipment. He paused after he said that, in the way beings pause when they want the weight of a thing to land. I asked if they had left any of their survey data in accessible format. He paused again, a different kind of pause. I asked again. He said the data was archived in the GSC public record and available to any registered colonial party. He said this the way someone says a thing they never expected to actually need to say. I thanked him. He asked if we understood that the condemnation was not symbolic. I said we understood perfectly. He asked if we intended to proceed. I told him we were going to take a vote. He said, in what I believe was the Vreth equivalent of stunned silence, that he would wait. The vote took 40 minutes, not whether to land. That had been decided before we left Earth, by circumstance more than anything else. The vote was about which sector to attempt first. The northern shelf had lower seismic activity but worse magnetic interference. The equatorial band had better geothermal access, but the fissure networks were denser. The southern approach was calmer on paper, but the atmospheric particulate was heavier there, which would complicate the first construction phase. We voted on the equatorial band, 14 votes over the northern shelf. I noted this in my log without further comment. When I came back to the comm channel, Quarantine was still there. I told him the vote had concluded. He asked what we had voted on. I said we had voted on sector approach. He said nothing for a moment, then asked me to repeat that. I repeated it. He said very carefully that he wanted to make sure his translator was functioning correctly, because it appeared we had voted not on whether to land on the condemned planet but on where. I confirmed that was correct. He said he would file an observation report with the GSC. I said that was very reasonable of him. We began our descent at 600 ship time. I stood at the forward observation port and watched Kethvora come up to meet us. It was orange and churning, lit from within by its own interior heat, fissure lines visible from orbit like cracks in fired clay. It was genuinely one of the most striking things I had ever seen. The kind of beautiful that people describe by pointing, because words slow it down too much. I finished my noodles. I put the bowl in the recycler. I went to get my gear. The first thing I felt when we landed was the ground moving, not violently, not like an earthquake, more like the planet was breathing slowly and was not particularly concerned about us being on its chest. My boots magnetized against the surface. My suit sealed. The air red as breathable but hot, the kind of hot that lives behind your eyes if you stand in it too long. I pulled out my core sampler. I pulled out my coffee. I started the math. The math was, by any standard metric, offensive to the principles of structural engineering. The fissure networks ran deep and frequent. The thermal output from the venting cycle was high enough to make conventional anchor systems a theoretical exercise. The magnetic pulse window gave us exactly 11 hours per cycle to run unshielded electronics before everything had to be hardened or shut down. I wrote in my log, Day 1 on surface, conditions as advertised, glossary holding up. Then I looked at the fissure data, and I looked at the thermal rhythms in the core output, and I looked at the pulse cycle timing, and I stopped writing and started thinking. Because there was something the Vreth report had identified as compounding hazards. I was starting to think of them as a system. Everything that was trying to kill us was doing it in a pattern. Patterns could be worked with. I finished my coffee. The ground pulsed once beneath my boots, slow, deep, steady, like a heartbeat. Let the record show. The first rule they teach you in structural engineering school is that you never fight the ground. You read it, you understand it, you build accordingly. The ground on Kethvora had apparently not taken the same course. Day 3 on the surface, I was standing on a shelf of compressed basalt that was technically moving beneath me at a rate of 2 millimeters per hour, in a direction I did not appreciate, holding a core sampler in one hand and my third coffee of the morning in the other, doing math that my old professor would have asked me to leave his class for suggesting. My crew was behind me. Deo Adebisi had built a flood barrier out of decommissioned shipping containers during the Lagos coastal crisis and won an engineering prize for it, which he mentioned rarely and only when the problem in front of us was worse than a flood barrier needed to be. He mentioned it now. I took it as context. Owen Marsh had read all 6,000 pages of the Vreth condemnation report. He had dog-eared 117 pages. I had asked him once what he had dog-eared them for. He said disagreement. I had not asked further questions. Owen was the kind of engineer who treated alien expert consensus as a strong opening argument and nothing more. Nneka Obi was 22 years old. She had graduated 18 months ahead of schedule and joined the colonial roster because, as she put it in her application, she wanted to work on problems that had not been solved yet. She read seismic data the way other people read weather reports: inconvenient, present, not terminal. She was currently crouched 15 meters away from me, pressing a sensor array against the basalt shelf, completely unbothered. These were my people. The problem in front of us was this. Conventional construction logic required stable ground for anchoring. Keth Vora did not have stable ground. It had rhythmically unstable ground, which was a different thing entirely, and the difference was the thing I had been thinking about since day one. The fissure networks were not random. That was the key. The Vreth report had cataloged them as unpredictably distributed seismic fractures, which was accurate if you looked at any single fissure in isolation. But when I mapped the full network against the thermal venting cycle, a structure emerged. The fissures breathed. They expanded during peak venting pressure and contracted during the low cycle. They did this on a rhythm. Not a perfectly clockwork rhythm, but a rhythm with enough regularity that you could anticipate it within a margin of error you could engineer around. Standard construction said, find stable ground and anchor into it. My counter-proposal arrived after 3 nights of no sleep and one very loud argument with a data model that kept telling me I was wrong. Do not anchor into stable ground, because stable ground does not exist here. Instead, anchor into the rhythm itself. Build structures designed to move with the venting cycle. Flex anchor systems that absorb the seismic motion rather than resisting it. Foundations that rode the pulse like a ship rides a wave, rather than trying to stand on the ocean floor and wonder why they kept getting wet. I pitched this to the Blazer on day 4 via uplink. He asked if any other species had used this approach before. I told him that was not a useful question. He asked if it had been tested. I said we were testing it now. He asked what the failure risk was. I told him that was also not a useful question, and that the useful question was what the failure risk was compared to conventional anchoring on active fissure ground, which was 100% certain failure on a long enough timeline. He was quiet for a moment. Then he approved the materials allocation. I wrote in my log, day 4, the Blazer has his moments. The build started on day 6. Deo ran the anchor installation team. He worked the way he always worked, quiet, precise, stopping twice to recalculate when the basalt did something unexpected, never once suggesting we were in over our heads. Owen was on the flex joint system, designing the connector points that would allow each modular section to shift independently without losing structural integrity. Nneka was on sensor array, calling out fissure movement in real time, her voice over the comm channel as steady as if she were reading a shopping list. I was everywhere. The magnetic pulse hit on day 7, right in the middle of the second anchor run. Everything unshielded went dark for 40 seconds. We had built the shielding around the core systems, but the secondary monitoring array went down, and we were running blind on the North Fissure network for 40 seconds, which is a long time when the ground is doing what the ground was doing. Nothing collapsed. I wrote in my log, pulse hit. Held, note for future, extend shielding to secondary array, non-negotiable. Day 9, the first modular hub frame went up. I am going to describe this carefully, because it mattered in a way I was not prepared for. The frame locked into the flex anchor system at 1400 hours local. The fissure network pulsed twice during the installation, We felt it through our boots, through the scaffolding, through the handles of every tool anyone was holding. The anchors moved with it, absorbed it. The flex joints redistributed the stress load exactly as the model predicted, within the tolerance margin Owen had calculated. The frame held. Nneka made a noise I had never heard a human being make before. Owen put both hands flat on the nearest structural beam like he was checking a pulse. Deo looked at the frame, then looked at the ground, then looked at the frame again, and said something in Yoruba that I understood perfectly and will not translate because some things belong to the language they come from. I looked at my log and wrote, Hub 1 standing, Jollof hot but standing. The work after that was brutal and steady and good in the way that only genuinely hard work can be good. 14-hour cycles. The magnetic pulse every 11 hours meant we worked in rhythm with the planet whether we wanted to or not. It turned out that 11 hours was a reasonable shift length. The planet had accidentally invented our work schedule, and it was not bad. Hub 2 framing started on day 15. The residential modules on day 19. The power grid, running entirely on geothermal tap from the venting cycle, because if you were going to live on top of a furnace, you used the heat, came online on day 22. It was on day 22 that the VRETH observation satellite sent its first automated ping. Standard message, proximity alert for the condemned zone, routine, generated by a sensor that had been watching an empty planet for years and was now, apparently, watching something else. I took the comm. I said, alert acknowledged, Hub 1 and Hub 2 operational, residential grid at 40% capacity, geothermal tap online, please update your maps when convenient. The satellite was automated, it did not respond. But 6 hours later, someone on the other end of that satellite's uplink did. The message said, Colonial vessel, this unit has been logging activity in the Kethvora condemned zone. We want to confirm, did you transmit hub operational? I confirmed. Another pause. How many hubs? I told them 2, with a third in progress. The response took 4 minutes. I have always wondered what happened in those 4 minutes on the other end of that comm line, whether someone called someone else into the room, whether there was a conversation I will never hear. The response said, we will update our survey logs. Please transmit structural specifications for archival purposes. I transmitted them. Owen laughed for approximately 45 seconds when I told him, not at the VRETH, at the situation, at the fact that we were filing paperwork with alien archivists from the surface of a condemned planet we had been on for 23 days and had already started receiving formal correspondence about. Day 30, Hub 3 complete, population 312. Day 41, Market District framing started. Nneka designed the anchor layout herself. I reviewed it. I changed 2 things. She was right about both changes before I made them and was gracious enough not to say so. Day 50. The first full magnetic pulse cycle passed with 0 system failures. I made a note in the structural log. I made a different note in my personal log. Day 50 on Kethvora. Ground moved 4 times today, held 4 times. Pulse at 1830 local, all systems clean. Deo found that the Eastern Fisher network has a secondary rhythm we had not mapped. We are mapping it now. Owen says it will improve the Hub 4 anchor model by 12%. Nneka says 15. I have put 20 credits on Nneka. The planet kept trying. We kept building. That was the whole of it. That was the work. Not heroic. Not dramatic. The steady, daily, deliberate act of building something on ground that would rather you did not, and doing it well enough that the ground's preference became irrelevant. I did not think about it too much. I had a city to build. I was mid-weld on the Hub 4 connector beam when Owen told me the VRETH media delegation had arrived. I finished the weld. The weld took 4 more minutes. Owen waited. He knew better than to interrupt a weld, which is one of the reasons I kept him around. Then I put down the torch and went. The delegation had come down in a shuttle that landed on our designated external pad with a precision that made our own landing look like we had fallen out of a pocket. 6 species represented, 12 journalists, camera equipment I did not have names for. They stood at the edge of the pad in the orange heat of Kethvora's midday looking at the settlement, 2 completed hub districts. A third in framing, the geothermal grid glowing softly at the base structures, the market district half-raised and already noisy, with an assortment of expressions that all translated, across every biological difference between them, to the same basic thing. They had not expected this. The Vreth journalist was first off the shuttle. His official name was something I genuinely could not hold in my memory, 4 syllables, 2 tonal shifts, a consonant cluster that my tongue had no architectural framework for. I called him Footnote privately, because in every message the GSC satellite had forwarded from his organization over the past 3 weeks, he had cited the 6,000-page condemnation report in a footnote. Every single message. The report that said we would die. Footnoted. By a man now standing on the planet the report was about, looking at the city that was not supposed to be here. He found me within the first 10 minutes. I was still holding the welding shield. He asked how we had addressed the seismic instability. I explained the Flexanchor harmonic system, the Fisher rhythm mapping, the way the venting cycle had become a structural ally rather than an enemy once we stopped treating it as a problem to solve and started treating it as a condition to work within. I kept it simple. Engineering has a way of sounding either obvious or impossible depending on whether you have done it, and I was trying for the first. He asked which species had developed the harmonic anchoring system. I said humans. He asked which species had taught the humans the system. I said humans. He was quiet for a long moment. His species did their silence differently from ours, a slight shift in the positioning of their secondary eyelids, a stilling of the small movable structures along their jaw line. It was, I had come to understand from 3 weeks of Vreth satellite correspondence, the equivalent of a human sitting back in a chair and staring at the ceiling. He said, there is no record of this method in the GSC engineering archive. I said there will be now. The other journalists came through over the next 2 hours, each one different, each one carrying, in their own species way, the same question dressed in different clothes. A Hethkar correspondent, their species communicated through structured light patterns, and their translator box worked with a half-second delay that gave every conversation a slightly dreamlike rhythm, asked me what engineering tradition our anchoring approach drew from. I said structural adaptation theory, coastal resilience design, and 40 days of not dying. The translator box processed this, and the Hethkar journalist made a pattern I was told indicated something between respect and confusion. A Drenville media pair, they always worked in pairs. Their species processed complex information better in dialogue with a counterpart, asked me how long the colony had been functional. I said 57 days. They conferred briefly. Then they asked if I meant 57 standard galactic days. I said I meant 57 Kethvora days, which were slightly shorter, but that the number did not change the answer in any meaningful way. They conferred again. Footnote followed me through most of the tour. He had a notebook, a physical one which I found interesting. He wrote in it with a stylus that moved in patterns rather than lines, Vreth script, words building outward from a center point rather than left to right. I watched him write for a moment when he was not watching me. He asked at the market district why the humans had not applied for a standard GSC habitable world allocation. I said standard channels were occupied. He asked if that was the actual reason. I said we worked with what was available. He wrote that down. He asked again later at the school building. Yes, there was a school, a real one, with a teacher and 31 students, and a science corner with mineral samples from 3 of the Fisher zones, Why Kethvora? Of all the available options, of all the directions a colonial mission could have gone, why the one world the GSC had attached a skull classification to and parked a quarantine buoy beside? I said, we do not wait well. He wrote that down too. I did not elaborate. The elaboration was the kind that did not help anything in my experience. It went like this. The habitable worlds went to the species with deep galactic ties, established trade relationships, centuries of interstellar presence. The borderline worlds went to the species with enough leverage to negotiate terms. The condemned worlds were left for whoever was desperate enough or stubborn enough or both. Humans were, historically, both. But that answer required too much context. And context was the kind of thing that made people feel sorry for you. And I did not need the galactic press feeling sorry for me. While I was standing in front of a half-built city I had raised on a world that had tried to eject me from its surface 11 times in 57 days. I did not need sympathy. I needed them to update their maps. By day 3 of the visit, the population of Ose Landing, that was what the colonists had started calling the main hub district, after my second name, which I had not authorized and could not stop, was 4,230 people. The third hub district had been framed and was 60% enclosed. The market operated every morning from 700 to 1400 local time, because 1400 was when the midday heat became genuinely unpleasant even for Kethvora standards. NNECA's team had mapped 2 additional Fisher subrhythms in the Eastern network. Owen had revised the Hub 5 anchor model using the new data. Deo had quietly become the person everyone brought their structural problems to at 200 when they did not want to bother me with them, and he was solving them correctly, which was all I had ever asked of anyone. Footnote found me on the evening of day 3, after the other journalists had returned to their shuttle for the night. He came to the observation shelf at the northern edge of Hub 2, a platform we had built into the structure with no official purpose, just a place to stand and look at the city taking shape below. It was a good place to stand. I went there often. He stood beside me for a while without saying anything. Then he asked, off the record, if I was afraid the planet would eventually win. If the core would shift in a way the flex anchors could not absorb. If Kethvora, which had been classified as unsurvivable by 11 months of dedicated alien survey work, would eventually prove the classification correct. I looked at him. I thought about the waterline, the old waterline, the real one, the 2 centimeters per year, very slow. Official reports that used the word manageable until the word became something you said over ruins. Footnote, I said, I watched my city drown 2 centimeters at a time, very polite about it, very measured. The reports never stopped calling it a developing situation. I looked back at the city. At least this planet is honest. It tries hard and it does not pretend otherwise. I know exactly what it is. That is more than I can say for a great deal of things. He was quiet for a while. He wrote something in his notebook. He did not ask me to explain it. I was glad I would not have. I went back to the survey data. NNECA's new Fisher mapping had flagged a pressure node in the eastern zone that I wanted to look at before we started Hub 5's foundation work. It was the kind of detail that did not matter until it did, and I preferred to know about it while it still did not. I wrote nothing in my log that night. The Galactic feeds ran their first stories the following morning. The Vreth Network's headline, translated by our uplink software, read, "Humans inhabit condemned world, reason disputed." The Hethkar correspondence piece opened with a light pattern sequence that our translator rendered as "a thing has occurred which requires new categories." The Drenville pair had filed a joint report that was, from what I could read of the summary, largely about the school, about the fact that there was one. I did not read the comment sections. I was told by Owen that the comment sections of 9 different species communication networks were generating significant activity. I thanked him for the information. I went back to the Fisher map. The city needed Hub 5. Hub 5 needed a foundation. The foundation needed the eastern pressure node accounted for. The Galactic press could have the headline. I had the ground. The alert came in at 4:17 local time. I was already awake. I slept badly on good nights, and Keth Vora had not yet provided a good night, which I considered fair. The alert was seismic deep core pressure event. Reading as a magnitude that had no direct equivalent in standard planetary classifications, because Keth Vora's geological scale did not map neatly to anything the GSC had catalogued. The closest translation in the condemnation report was terminal geological occurrence. They had underlined it in the original survey document. I was pulling on my work suit before the second alarm pulse finished. The corridor outside my module was already moving. Not running. The protocols were clear on that. No running in the corridor networks during a seismic event, because the last thing a flex anchor structure needed was 300 people all moving in the same direction at the same moment. Fast walking. Focused. People carrying the faces they wore when a thing they had been prepared for had arrived. Outside was different. The ground was doing something I did not have vocabulary for. Not shaking in the way the word shaking implies, not a side-to-side tremor, not a vertical heave. Something deeper and more total, as if the ground had decided to exist slightly differently than it had a moment ago, and was still deciding. The fissure networks were reading at peak expansion and climbing. The harmonic anchors in Hub 2's eastern face were logging stress loads at 40% over standard tolerance. I ran. Stairs, corridor junction, Hub 3 connector bridge, outside. The sky was dark, but the ground was lit from below the way it always was. The orange glow from the fissure lines, but brighter now, the lines wider, the heat radiating upward in visible waves. The geothermal grid was screaming on every sensor I had. Peak output climbing. Owen was on the comm. His voice was precise and too calm, which was how I knew it was bad. Eastern fissure network has shifted, he said. Subrhythm delta has collapsed into the primary cycle. The pressure node NNECA flagged last week. It has activated. We have flex anchor overload on Hub 3's south face, and Hub 4's east anchor line is reading critical. Hub 4, I said. East line. I changed direction. Hub 4. East anchor access. Down the service path that ran between the geothermal feed lines, where the heat was strong enough to make the suit work hard and the light was all from below. The anchor line was visible before I reached it. The flex joint at the base was deformed, not broken, not yet, but operating at a bend angle the model had rated as pre-failure. The connector above it was holding but not correctly. The load distribution was wrong. If the primary fissure pulsed again at current expansion levels, the joint would go. I got on the comm for Deo. He was already there. He had seen the same reading from the structural monitoring hub. He arrived from the opposite direction 40 seconds later, carrying a joint brace kit that he had, apparently, picked up on his way out of the residential block on pure instinct. I told him he was better at this job than he let on. He said he knew. We worked the brace into position during the next low-cycle window, 90 seconds of reduced venting pressure that the rhythm gave us like a breath held. The joint groaned. The anchor line redistributed. The stress reading dropped from critical to high. High was survivable. Hub 3's south face was worse. NNECA had already evacuated the nearest residential modules. She had not waited for an order. She had read the structural load numbers and moved people, and every person she moved was out when the south anchor cluster shifted. Not failed. Shifted. The flex design had done what it was designed to do, absorbing the load by redistributing rather than breaking. But the redistribution had put stress on the wall panels above the anchor line, and 2 of them had come down. One of them came down on Deo. He had followed me to Hub 3 after we finished the anchor brace. He was behind me when the panel gave. It was not a large section. It was enough. He went down under the edge of it with a sound that I felt more than heard, and I turned and the ground pulsed again and I was already moving. He was conscious. That was the first thing I checked. Then limbs. Then where the panel had him, the left leg, pinned above the knee, nothing catastrophic in the initial look, but I was not a medic and I did not speculate on what I could not confirm. Nneka was there before I finished the check. She had a conduit pipe from the maintenance rack 20 meters away. She had run for it, come back, was already setting it as a lever. I got my hands under the panel edge. The ground pulsed. We held position. On the next low cycle we levered, and the panel shifted enough that Deo pulled himself clear with the expression of a man doing a calculation that came out in his favor. He said something in Yoruba. I replied without thinking, first time I had spoken it in 3 years. The words coming back the way the words of a language you grew up around do, without being summoned, just there. He looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything after that. Owen's voice on the comm. Primary event is decaying. Fissure network showing contraction in eastern zone. Pressure node output dropping. I counted 40 seconds. Then the ground stopped arguing with itself. Not silence, Kethvora did not do silence. The low hum of the geothermal grid, the heat radiating upward. The settlement around us, every part of it I could see standing. Some of it battered. Some of it flexed in ways it would need work on. None of it collapsed. None of it. I stood in the orange light and I looked at what we had built, and I counted what the planet had done to it, and the count came out the way good math comes out when you have done it right. In our favor. Deo was helped to the medical hub. Nneka went with him. Owen began the structural assessment from the monitoring station, methodical, starting at the highest load zones and working outward. I walked the settlement perimeter, which took 40 minutes, and I noted every deformation, every panel shift, every anchor that had flexed beyond tolerance and would need replacement. The school was intact. I noted that separately. The Vreth observation satellite pinged at 6:19. Not automated. The same relay contact we had been corresponding with for weeks, the one that had started filing formal survey updates based on our progress reports. Colonial settlement Kethvora. We observed the seismic event. Our models indicated total colony loss at the recorded magnitude. Please confirm current status. I took the comm. Colony operational, I said. 41 injured, none critical. 2 structural panels in Hub 3 require replacement. Hub 4 east anchor line braced. Replacement scheduled for next cycle. No fatalities. I looked at the Fissure network readout on my wrist unit. We will need updated survey maps. The eastern Fissure network has shifted approximately 12 meters northwest of previous mapping. Please transmit revised data when you have it processed. Silence. You are requesting survey assistance. We are requesting survey assistance. A longer silence. We will transmit revised Fissure data within 48 standard hours. I said thank you, I meant it. Owen found me at 700 with the full assessment. 6 structural deformations requiring repair. 2 anchor replacements. 1 full panel reconstruction on Hub 3's south face. 0 catastrophic failures. He said this last part simply, factually, with the tone of someone delivering a result they had calculated the odds on and are quietly satisfied to see confirmed. I told him to start the repair schedule. He went. I sat down on the basalt at the edge of the settlement perimeter, just outside the Hub 2 access path, where the Fissure glow was bright and steady, and the heat pushed up through the suit, and the planet was doing what it always did, existing at full intensity, without apology, without moderation. Rias, my materials coordinator, was sitting 10 meters away in the dust, not doing anything, just sitting. I had not noticed him come there. He had been on the Hub 3 evacuation team during the event, coordinating the panel removal debris. He was covered in the gray dust that came off the basalt panels and he was laughing. Not the laughing of someone who found something funny. The laughing that comes out the far side of something you were not certain you would come out of, that has no humor in it and no despair, just the body releasing what it held. I did not say anything. I looked at the settlement, the parts that held, the parts we would fix, the school, the market district where the vendors would set up in 3 hours because it was a market day and nothing on Keth Vora, apparently, canceled market day. Hub 5's foundation work, paused now but resuming tomorrow, the eastern pressure node now mapped more accurately than it had ever been because we had seen it perform in full. I thought about the water line. I did not write in my log. I let it sit. I let it be what it was, the planet trying and us still here, which was the whole of the relationship between Keth Vora and the people who had decided to live on it. Not a victory, not a conquest, something quieter and more permanent than both. By afternoon, the repair teams were working. By evening, the market was open. I wore a dress to the ceremony. This is the first thing worth saying about that day. Not the recognition itself, not the formal reclassification, not the 6-member GSC delegation in their pressed official uniforms, not the fact that every major galactic news network had a crew on the surface, the dress. Bought in the Lagos market district before we left Earth, one of those decisions that seemed irrelevant at the time and later turned out to be the most deliberate choice I had made. Bright printed fabric. The wrong kind of formal for a Galactic Survey Commission reclassification ceremony. Absolutely correct for every other reason. I put it on in the gray pre-dawn of Keth Vora's morning, while the geothermal grid hummed its normal note beneath the floor of my module, and the fissure lines outside cast their usual orange light through the window, and I went out into a settlement that had 7 hub districts, a school with 112 students, a medical hub with 4 trained staff, a market that operated 6 days in 7, and a population of 6,940 people who had arrived on a condemned planet and declined to leave. Day 847. Footnote was already at the ceremony ground when I arrived. He had been on Keth Vora for 8 months. His original assignment had been 3 days. His editor had sent 14 requests for his return. He had responded to each one with more footage. He was standing at the edge of the press area in the gray morning light with his notebook open, and when he saw me, he wrote something that I did not try to read. The GSC delegation arrived at 800 in a transport that landed with their characteristic precision. 6 officials. The senior delegate was a Vreth named something my translator rendered as Assessor Neth Valley, which was close enough to a real name that I used it. She was older. Vreth age was difficult to read, but something in the way she moved suggested she had been in the GSC long enough to have read the original Keth Vora survey herself, back when it was filed, back when it meant something definitive. She found me before the formal proceedings started, not at a podium, not in front of cameras, just the 2 of us standing at the edge of the main plaza while her staff arranged themselves and ours arranged ourselves, and the morning heat built steadily around us. She said she had reviewed every survey update we had transmitted over the past 800 days. I said I hoped they were useful. She said they were unprecedented, that the GSC archive had no prior record of a Class IX condemned world producing habitable settlement data, that the Flexanchor harmonic system had already been formally cataloged in the engineering archive under what they were calling adaptive geological co-construction methodology. I asked how they had categorized it. She said they had created a new category. I waited. Anthropic habitability override, she said. It is the first new habitability classification in 230 standard years. I looked at the settlement. We just built things, I said. She made the Vreth stillness expression, the secondary eyelid shift, the jawline quiet. She said, yes, that is precisely what you did. The formal ceremony took 40 minutes. Assessor Neth Valley read the reclassification decree in GSC formal language, which our translator rendered in real time, and the key line, Keth Vora, formerly classified Class IX condemned, formally reclassified as Class IV inhabited, special engineering exemption, was short enough that I heard it clearly before my brain started doing what brains do with things that are larger than expected. I looked at the ground. Owen was in the front row. He was not crying. His jaw was set very precisely, and he was looking at a point in the middle distance with the expression of a man applying all available resources to remaining a credible structural engineer in a public setting. Deo, beside him, had one hand flat on his knee, palm down, and was very still in the way he went still when he was holding something in that was too large to hold. Nneka had her arms crossed and her chin up, and was looking directly at the assessor with an expression that was the purest form of she knew it the whole time, and she was right too. Rias was crying straightforwardly without making any effort not to. I respected this. Then came the name. I had taken myself off the nomming committee 6 months ago. I had nominated myself off it, which was not something committee rules explicitly covered, but I had written a formal note explaining that any city named after a person still alive to witness it being named was a mistake in judgment, and that I had enough judgment problems with the planet itself without adding that one. The committee had accepted my withdrawal without significant argument, which I also respected. They had deliberated for 3 weeks. The name they had chosen was Akafir. Not a famous name, not a name in the GSC archive, not a name attached to any colonial record or engineering achievement or galactic milestone, a name from Lagos, a woman who had lived in the coastal district and had drowned in 2271 during one of the early inundation events, when the water was still being officially described as a developing situation. A woman who had, by every record I had ever found of her, spent the last 4 years of her life building small raised platforms for her neighbors' homes using whatever materials she could get, because the official response was slow and the water was not. Nobody on the nomming committee knew her. They had found her name in a local memorial archive. They had chosen it because, as the committee chair told me afterward, it fit. When Assessor Nethvali said the name, Akafir City, Keth Vora, I was looking at the ground. The basalt, the fissure glow beneath it, the orange-lit morning of a planet that had spent 847 days trying to prove the GSC right and had failed at it. I was very busy looking at the ground. I did not write in my log that day, not yet. Footnote found me after the ceremony had released its formal shape and become the kind of event where people talked in small groups and the catering team Nneka had organized. Because someone had to, and Nneka organized things when they needed organizing, worked their way through the crowd with trays of food that smelled like 6 different cities from 6 different continents from one small planet, in an unremarkable solar system that the galactic community had largely treated as a late arrival. He found me at the observation platform on Hub 2's northern face, the same place we had stood 8 months ago when he had asked me about the water line. The city was below us now, really a city, not a settlement, not a colonial installation, a city with districts and rhythm and noise, and the particular organized chaos of several thousand people living their actual lives rather than their survival contingency lives. He stood beside me without saying anything for a while. I had learned his actual name over 8 months. I had learned to approximate it correctly. I still thought of him as Footnote and probably always would, which I considered a form of affection. He asked if I would stay. I said yes. He asked if it was because I had built it. I thought about that. Building it was part of the answer. The part that lived in the Flex-Anchor calculations and the Fisher rhythm maps and the 42 repaired structural deformations logged in the maintenance records over 800 days. The part that lived in the school being intact after the big event and the market opening that same evening and Nneka's anchor layout that I had changed 2 things on, and she had been right about both. But that was not all of it. The rest of it was harder to say. It went like this. I had spent 11 years after the Lagos waterline moved being in places that were technically managing. Places that were functional and safe and reasonable, and built for a kind of life that I kept sliding off the edges of without being able to explain why. Places that had decided what they were and were not interested in revision. Kethvora had not decided what it was. It was deciding, every 11 hours when the pulse came through, every morning when the fissure lines lit the ground from below, every time the deep core pressure moved in its rhythm, and the anchors moved with it and the city held. It was in the middle of becoming something, and so was everyone in it, and that was the truest thing I knew about why I was staying. But I did not say any of that. I said I built it. Footnote nodded. He wrote something in his notebook. Then he said, after a moment, the question I had been waiting for him to ask since the ceremony. Not as a journalist, as someone who had spent 8 months watching a thing happen that he had not had a category for when he arrived. What do humans do, he said, with places the galaxy gives up on? I thought about it. Genuinely, in the way you think about something when you are not performing the thinking but actually doing it. We live in them, I said. We are very good at that. He was quiet. I watched the city. Below us, in the market district, the afternoon vendors were setting up early because someone had clearly decided the reclassification ceremony was a market occasion, and they were not wrong. The school had let out at noon, and some of the older students had come to watch the ceremony from the plaza edge and were now, apparently, helping the catering team carry trays, because that was what children did when adults were busy and there were trays nearby. The geothermal grid hummed. A group of Deo's anchor crew were running what looked like a voluntary inspection of the Hub 5 connector joints, on their day off, for no reason other than that it was their habit and their preference, and the joints were there to inspect. Owen was at the base of Hub 3 with a measuring tool, checking a panel seam that had been in the maintenance log for 3 weeks. He did not need to be doing that today. He was doing it because Owen always had one more thing to check, and that was not anxiety. It was the particular piece of a person who understood that the work was what kept the thing standing, and the thing standing was worth the work, and that was a complete sentence. Deo was at the market. I could see him from the platform, at the food section, talking to one of the vendors with the ease of someone who has become a regular, and both parties are pleased about it. Nneka was, I scanned the plaza until I found her, sitting at the edge of the school grounds with one of the older students, both of them looking at something on a data tablet, and whatever it was, Nneka was pointing at it with the focused attention she gave to problems she found genuinely interesting. The student was nodding with the focus of someone learning something real from someone who knew it. Rias was by the geothermal tap access panel on the west side of Hub 1, which was not his area, but the tap had been logging a minor variance since the pressure event 2 weeks ago, and Rias had taken a personal interest in the variance in the way Rias took personal interests in things that sat in the margins of the maintenance log. He had a wrench. He was content. I looked at all of this for a long time. Then I went back to my module. I sat at my desk. The fissure light came through the window at the low angle of Kethvora's late afternoon, which was orange and warm and familiar in the way that things become familiar when you have given them enough time and attention, and they have given you back what they had to give. I opened my log. I wrote, Day 847, Aquifer City, Kethvora. Core venting at standard cycle, grid holding, reclassification ceremony concluded. Hub 5 foundation work resumes tomorrow, Eastern Fissure Data Incorporated. Deo's leg has healed completely. He beat me to the morning inspection by 20 minutes. Nneka's student asked her what the next problem is. She told him the next problem is whatever the planet has not done yet. He thought that was an excellent answer. So did I. Owen checked the Hub 3 panel seam. It is fine. He checked it anyway. It will always be fine and he will always check it. This is correct. Rias fixed the geothermal variance. It was a minor seal issue. He is very pleased with himself. He is allowed. There is a city here. We built it. Let the record show.